Then let's start then. Um, so we'll just start with some meditation. So the first meditation we'll do is the meditation to develop concentration or focus. And then you can choose the object that's most comfortable for you. Could be the air coming in and out of your nostrils. It could be your belly rising and falling. It could be an image of a Buddha or a spiritual um, being. It could be, um, love as it's defined in the tradition, or compassion as it's. So just whatever object you're going to concentrate on. And we'll just do this for a few minutes. So as you notice, so the idea is to create a sort of balance between overexcitement and dullness. So a focused, relaxed, but bright and energetic kind of concentration. And our minds will probably wander. So when that happens, we'll just notice the mind it has wandered off the object, and then gently bring it back to the object. And we'll just do that process for 5 or so minutes. And then with whatever sort of calm but clear um, state of mind and body we have, then we'll adjust our motivation to make it as expansive as possible. So we think all beings have been kind to me directly or indirectly. And if I have an understanding or belief in reincarnation, then I could think they've all been kind to me as a mother at some point. So we remember their kindness. And we allow a natural sense of wishing to repay that kindness to arise. And then we might think all those beings who have been kind to us as mothers want happiness and the causes of happiness in just the same way that we do. And so, in the way that we want it for ourselves, we can want it for others. And then we'll call that the mind of love. So we generate uh, the mind that wants happiness for others and happiness and causes of happiness for others. And then in the same way that we wish to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, And others also wish to be free from suffering, the causes of suffering. So we can, if we generate in the way that we generate it for ourselves, we can generate that wish for others, and we'll call that the mind of compassion. And then we can develop a mind that takes responsibility to help beings have happiness and its causes and to be free from suffering and its causes. So we to generate the mind of universal responsibility. So I alone will cause this to happen. So in any interaction you have with a living being, it's just you and that being. And if that being could do this themselves, they would have. So they need outside support, and you're that person. And then at the same time, you have a realistic assessment of your own qualities. So we don't always do or think or say the right things. It's hard to know what living beings need or what they're thinking or even, what they're feeling. More unsure what action to take to help. So then with an honest assessment of our qualities, then we generate the mind to develop all our natural human qualities to their limit. And so we call that, wanting in this tradition, wanting to become a Buddha. So if I could develop my generosity to kind of infinitely or exponentially, or my patience or my ethics or concentration and all the other qualities that humans are capable of developing, with that. So we call that a mind of the Buddha. So we develop the wish to become a Buddha, to develop those qualities, because we wish to free beings from the causes of suffering and suffering itself, and for them to have happiness, the cause of happiness. And this is all an act of wishing to repay their kindness that they've shown us over a long period of time. So if you can develop a sense of wishing to develop in that way, then you can rest in that wish like you were watching your breath, like focus on that wish and kind of relax on it. And then if you don't feel that so easily, then start with the beginning of the sequence with remembering the kindness or recognizing beings have been kind to you, and try and develop some sort of universal responsibility. So that motivation, to the best of our ability to cultivate it or generate it. So in order to become a Buddha, then we're going to study these Lamrim topics, or do a survey of them, even if we're not able to dig into them that much. And we're doing that so that we can learn to develop these qualities and develop spiritually so that we can benefit universal beings. So that's the motivation. So we've talked about having a spiritual teacher and how to sort of relate to that person. And then we've touched on a little bit having a perfect human rebirth, so a rebirth that's conducive to spiritual practice. We've kind of touched on that just very briefly. Then we thought about death and impermanence and realized we have limited time in this body, and our priorities, we've kind of examined what our priorities are with that, how we're going to use that limited time, what our priorities are. And then we've touched on the suffering of different realms in traditional Buddhist cosmology. So the different alternatives and why they are not conducive to spiritual practice. And then the next topic will be refuge, but I think I'll do it in this kind of meditation style. So imagine in the space in front of you are various levels or different categories of holy beings. So there's Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and beings that protect them, Dharma protectors, and imagine they fill the entirety of space, every single atom. And then at the same time, imagine to the right of you is your father, and stretching outwards is sort of the lineage of men that contributed to your existence. And to your left, you imagine your mother and the women, the lineage of women that contribute to existence. And stretching out behind you is the continuity of your lives. And before you are the beings that are the so-called enemies, so the beings for which you have a difficult uh, relationship with, so they're right in front of you. You can't ignore them. And then imagining the beings behind you or the beings for which you have a clinging sort of attachment, like a neurotic sort of clinging to. So behind you, they don't distract you as much. And then on the spaces between are the beings for who you don't think of, neutral beings. You don't notice them, and you kind of put them on either side of you, filling up. And you imagine all these beings are in the form of human beings. And you think, I'm going to um, kind of lead them in a small reflection on refuge. And then again, you can focus on the holy beings in front of you. So you imagine holy beings, they fill the entirety of space. And you imagine that they're animated, like they're really before you. So not like picture, not like 2D images, but like 3D living forms. But they're made of light and they're sort of brilliant. And they're seated on um, cushions and teaching thrones. If you've ever seen a teaching throne, but cushions is fine. And they're engaged in the activities of a special being, what I'm calling a holy being, so of a special being. So they might be meditating or teaching or debating or performing acts of generosity or service. Um, and then imagine that all these beings are inseparable from your root spiritual teacher. And then you think, mm, if I don't change my actions of body, speech, and mind, then I will um, potentially end up in um, what are called the three lower realms. So if I don't um, change my actions of body, speech, and mind, then I could end up um, incredibly um, you know, incapable of understanding or spiritual practice like animals. Or I could wind up with intense craving and insatiable craving, like the hungry ghosts. Or I could end up with intense hatred and wind up with the suffering found in these what are called the hell realms. So if I were to be an animal for instance, I might be afraid of being eaten, or I could be exploited by human beings, or live in constant fear, mm, like and if I were like a hungry ghost, then I could be always searching and searching for a little bit of relief for my thirst or hunger, and I wouldn't be capable of any food or water I found would turn to blood and pus as the sort of traditional explanation, or my throat would be too narrow and small to swallow it. And if it got into my belly, it would be hot like lava, or I just, no matter what I did, I couldn't relieve that hunger and thirst. Or I could wind up like a helping, suffering with various levels of torment, extreme heat, extreme cold, mm, and all the traditional descriptions mm, that you get in different cultures about the kinds of. Anyway, so all that suffering would make it very difficult for me to practice spiritual paths. It's so difficult to concentrate on the well-being of others when you're suffering to that intensity. And oftentimes when we're suffering to that degree, we can create even more problems for ourselves. And so it perpetuates for a long time. It's very hard to get off these kinds of cycles. So we develop a kind of constructive fear. And when we have fear, then it's natural to um, avoid it or to mm, escape it or to make it go away in some way. So if you were in a war-torn country, then you might take refuge in a country that's more stable or offers you stability or hope or relief. So we see that in our own lives. So where will we go for refuge? And the Buddhist answers that we should go for refuge um, to what are called the three jewels, which is the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Mm. So when we take refuge, then we need to understand why uh, the the place of refuge, the object of refuge, is better, or is an alternative to the suffering that we're afraid of experiencing. So we can think of a Buddha like a doctor, and the Dharma like medicine, and the Sangha like the support staff and nurses, but other support staff, so the helpers to the principal physician. so, so what does the Buddha teach? Mm, Well, so what are the qualities of the Buddha? So, so you can think, well, the Buddha, by definition, has a perfectly completed sense of compassion and love for all living beings. So whether it's a hell being or a hungry ghost or an animal or a human or a demigod or a god, and other beings in the Buddhist cosmology, no matter what they've done to a Buddha or not done for the Buddha, they feel the exact same. By definition, they feel the exact same sense of compassion and love. So they feel the exact same compassion and love for the political figure you like, and they feel the exact same compassion and love for the political figure you don't like. And if a being is anointing a Buddha's hand with oils, perfumed oils, or cutting through, harming their hand with a knife, they'd feel the same love and compassion for each being. And also, the Buddha, by definition, understands reality as it is. And by understanding reality as it is free from delusion or sometimes the word afflictive emotion is used. So the Buddha is free from hatred, is free from craving, is free from ignorance, and is free from all the states of mind that are in a similar class. So jealousy, free of impatience. And because they're free of those delusions or afflictive emotions, they don't create karmas, volitional karmas, in the way that ordinary beings do. And so they're by definition free of the cycle of rebirths. And they're free from the cycle of rebirths, which are characterized by the three types of suffering. So they're free of gross suffering. They're free of suffering of change. They're free of all pervasive compounded suffering. And the Buddha teaches the Dharma. And the Dharma, one etymology of the word Dharma in Tibetan. So the Tibetan word is Chi. And one etymology is that it holds you back, to hold back, or so holds you back from suffering. So the Dharma is the set of teachings that allow you to develop all those, all that love and compassion, and the skillful means of a Buddha. And the Dharma is the teachings that allows you to see reality clearly. It allows you to transform. And then the Sangha, or the, proof that ordinary beings can accomplish what the Buddha has accomplished. And they're able to support us in our pursuit of total transformation because they've traversed the path themselves. And we could think of absolute and relative understanding of these objects of refuge. So we think, the Buddha's mind, the qualities of Buddha's mind as absolute, as the absolute Buddha. And then the relative Buddha might be like the historical Buddha, who's said to have taught for 45 years or so, 40, 45 years or so after his enlightenment. So we can think, uh, if I'm going to trust someone, that's the kind of person I'm going to trust. Someone who understands reality as it is and is free from delusions and karma, and and someone who has a kind of perfectly developed love and compassion for beings. That's the kind of person I would trust. And that being through the relative dharma, which might be the books and audio lectures and videos of. So through the relative dharma, they teach the absolute dharma. So the true cessations and paths, uh, how to abandon afflictive minds. So the kind of teaching I'm putting my trust in is one that helps me abandon those kinds of minds. And that helps me stop or prevent the three types of suffering. And that's the kind of teaching, that's the kind of information I want. Those are the kinds of minds I want to possess myself. And the process of us traversing a spiritual path, we need support. So we could think of the absolute Sangha, so the beings who have understood reality as it is to some degree, even if they're not Buddhas themselves, but uh, you know, I want support from people who have accomplished what I'm wishing to accomplish, and put our kind of trust or faith in the not conventional relative sangha. So this is the monks and ordained monks and nuns, particularly fully ordained monks and nuns, who have dedicated themselves to pursuing this path, to preserve its teachings, who have taken a collection of vows in order to guide them. And so you to try and develop some sense of trust or faith Now, sometimes that can be very abstract. These kinds of things I'm just glossing over. So, in practical terms, it can be helpful just to think of one teaching or one idea connected with Buddhism that's made a real impact on your life, or perhaps a person or an experience, and try and notice how it helped you and how you'd like to, have more of that. And then with that kind of trust, then we'll do the refuge prayer. Sangye Juran Zogi Junam Janju Bardu Dani Gyabzoji Zogi Junzogi Besonagi Joda Benjur Sangye Jubarjo Sangye Juran Zogi Junam Janju Bardu Dani Gyabzoji Dagi Janzagi Besonagi Joda Benjur Sangye Jubasho Sangye Chodan Zagi Jonam Chanju Bordu Dani Gyazochi Dagi Janzagi Besonagi Joda Benjur Sangye Jubasho. And then imagine that whole scene in front of you, all those holy beings of different kinds. They'll dissolve into light. That light comes to the crown of your head and descends to the crown of your head, going past sort of the third eye region, and past the throat, and then settling in the center of the chest, which is, called the heart. Then allow the light just to sort of become, kind of dissolve into you, become one with you. Okay. And then you can relax your body and mind. Uh, so, so, so the next topic in Alam Rim after death and impermanence, and then refuge. So you develop a sense of refuge. So what I did was just more of a semi-experiential, really glossing over things. It gets much more in depth. And the basic point is to prove to oneself or to become familiar with the qualities of the objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to inspire faith or trust, if you will. because the next topic is karma. And because karma is sort of not readily perceivable in some ways, or it's a complex topic, or it's not immediately accessible, then that then having developed that trust or faith before can make exploring the topic just a little bit easier. At the same time, karma becomes, or exploring karma a little bit becomes the first, not the first, but it's the method by which it's recommended that protecting one's karma is the method by which one avoids the suffering realms that are reflected on earlier in the sequence of meditations. And so for us, since this is just a very summary course, then I thought I would just kind of describe the way that karma is conceived of in Buddhism. Now karma, the word karma comes from the Hindu tradition and predates it, but the Buddhist explanation of what it is differs than what you might find in a Hindu explanation, potentially. I read once, although I can't remember exactly where I read it, but the early Hindu concept of karma was that if you engaged in certain rituals, like spiritual rituals, and did the functions of your caste, then that contributed to the universe working in order, in correct order. And that if you didn't do those things, then calamities befall. The order of the universe kind of gets shaken. The way that Tibetan Buddhism, the way the Buddhist idea of karma is different from that one, is that karma is about volitional action and puts the agency on the person to determine the quality of their existence and their future existence, as opposed to sort of satisfying the order of different gods that construct the universe. Does that make sense? It's about the agency part. And so karma has these four basic qualities, qualities that are worth learning. So the first one is that, I'm looking at my notes. So the first one is that karma is definite. And what they mean by that is that is that a cause ripens as its concordant effect. And so this is where having the definition of a virtuous karma and a non-virtuous karma is helpful. So a virtuous karma, or a virtuous volitional action, is one in which its effect ripens as some kind of happiness. And a non-virtuous karma is one in which the cause ripens as in the effect of some kind of suffering. And so this is just to say that that the effects are, that the causes are somewhat predictable in the way that, and concordant in the way that a seed leads to a predictable kind of plant. So if you plant a chili seed, you'll get a chili plant. You won't get a daisy. And so all all virtuous actions will result in happiness if they ripen, and all negative actions will ripen as some kind of suffering if they ripen or when they ripen. And then the next characteristic is karma is expandable. And this is the idea that a small action expands to a big effect, or it can, in the way that an acorn can grow an oak tree that's now filled with lots of acorns. So something small can become very big. And this is, well, this is an interesting idea because you see this in the practice side of things, in the practice component of Buddhism. This is when, this is an idea that is used to encourage students to be really mindful of even tiny things, that even, a small negative action sort of can kind of create a habit that can lead to more. A small lie here kind of can get out of hand. We can develop a habit of it. We can, sorry, I'm not being very clear. There's just this belief that if you don't address things, they get bigger and bigger, and that can include positive and negative actions. So a small negative action, if it's not addressed, can expand and expand and expand. And so the belief is that it needs to be addressed as soon as possible, or else its nature is to expand. So that's just an interesting characteristic. And then the third idea is that you will not experience the effect of an action you haven't done, which means that I can't do an action that will affect your karma, and you can't do one that'll affect my karma. I mean, we can support each other and help each other, but I can't transfer my actions to you. And I always think that's an interesting idea, because the Buddha is not like the Buddha is not said to be able to just transfer his own wisdom and merits and to disciples, and can't wash away other people's negative actions. It's really up to us in order to change ourselves. There's no one that can do it for us. I think that's the big, not even your teachers, because in Tibetan Buddhism there's a big emphasis on gurus and how they're so necessary and important, but even your teacher can't install exactly. I mean, it all has to, we have to do the work. And so to me, it just highlights that sense of agency. And then the fourth idea is that karmic seeds are not lost. So, unless there's an interrupting force, the karma will ripen at some point. These points are things that are just taken, they're found in the sutras, they're described in different sutras, and they are, what are they? They're sort of objects of faith in the beginning. So in the Buddhist tradition, it's believed you can eventually verify these things through meditation and your own spiritual insights. But in the beginning, they're just what Buddha said. He's like, this is how karma works. This is how happiness works. This is how suffering works. And so you can start to see why there's they do the meditations on refuge before it, because in order to consider these ideas, you have to have some sort of element of faith or trust in the teacher before you, or in this case the Buddha, right? So So karmic seeds are not lost. So, but they do say that if there's an intervening force, then that sometimes can change the outcome of a karma. So virtuous karma is said to be destroyed, if you will, um, by hatred and wrong views, I think. And negative karmas can be purified, and they have rituals where you analyze an action and um, you know, apply like a remedy to it, and um, vow not to commit the action again. But left to their own devices, they will ripen. They are part of your karmic inheritance. So, what do you think about these ideas? I mean, I don't know. Just what are your thoughts? Because so those are the general characteristics, but I don't know how helpful it is just to hear those characteristics. I mean, I don't know, does it impact? I don't know. What do you think?
I think I understand these, karma as a law, but I'm not so sure that I believe it.
Mm,
Um, and my other issue is that uh, I'll give an example. I am a member of like some Facebook groups, and
mhm,
somebody was talking about uh, what uh, what should they do about this possum that's living under their
mhm,
home, and this possum was doing all this damage. And this is supposed to be a social group of like secular Buddhists. And but I noticed like two main threads of the advice. One was you can kill the possum and not develop like plant the seeds of or not consider it non-virtuous because it's in self-defense, which is preposterous because how many possum killings have you heard about? And the second thing was call an exterminator and the karma will be theirs. They will kill the possum. So you can kind
uh,
of just pass the buck. And while I'm not learning about Buddhism necessarily from these people, I saw these two threads and I think it's like, karma seems to have all the, you can circumvent it, at least in your own mind, by you can go and buy meat in the supermarket and say, well, I didn't take the life, it's somebody on a farm took that life. And also if you see somebody suffering, you can allow that suffering um, and sleep okay at night saying, well, that's their karma. So I feel like I kind of wrestle with those ideas that you can just kind of
mm,
find a loophole in it, which I don't, if it's a law, you probably can't find a loophole, but you can soothe yourself and not be as virtuous as you could be by kind of passing it on or having some sort of rationalization for it. And then the other thing, if you don't mind, it's like, this is a little bit more political, but
yeah,
I
go
feel
for it.
like I feel like sometimes religion has this, when you're talking about the caste system or, even like in the Christian kind of sense of turn the other cheek, it's kind of like you're you're suffering in this life and accepting it, and your hope is to have a better life the next time around.
Uh,
And that kind of like supports the status quo, like, don't ask for more, be very satisfied, keep working hard. And there's some value to suffering in this life so that you're kind of like, doing a trade off for the next one. And so those are my two, the loopholes, and then kind of the political nature of it, of like keeping people in line, like mass
mm,
control. That's my other. So I don't know if you can address those or not, or if those are even relevant to what you're talking about. But
they're
those
absolutely
are my
relevant.
issues.
They're
Okay,
absolutely
thank you.
relevant. Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's start with the loopholes because they're a little bit easier. Um, I mean, what was the first loophole? The first loophole is what, the self-defense loophole?
Yeah, the self-defense and just kind of pass the buck.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a spider in my house and I ask you to come and kill it, it's like that's on
Right.
you, not on me.
Right. I mean, in you know, in the Long Rim commentary I was reading by the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, today, I mean, it's very clear that from the Tibet, at least from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, asking someone to do something for you means that you have essentially engaged in the action. And so for them, that's no loophole. I mean, they're very explicit about asking um, others to do quote unquote negative actions for you. So when they so like if they so if you read Lama Tsongkhapa's um Lamim Chenmo, and you got to the part where he's like going through the there's a set of 10 like negative actions to be particularly careful about. Then the first one is killing, and then a part of that will be an analysis about if you order, an army to kill, then it's like you've done all the killing that they've engaged in. So for Tibetan Buddhists, that's not a loophole at all. In terms of self-defense, that one's a little interesting. When they talk about like the results of, or they talk about like the weightiness of karma, they sort of categorize different things that contribute to its relative weightiness. So, for example, um, repetition of an action would be considered weighty. So, like if you worked in like a slaughterhouse, even though you don't have a particular animosity towards chickens, for example, but you kill, you know, thousands, I mean, hundreds of thousands of chickens as part of your career or something, the repetition would be considered weighty. And there's an element of weightiness in terms of like your focus and the intensity of the delusion that's supporting the action. So in terms of killing, like a like a like not to be too intense, but like a serial killer who's like planning and kind of hunting people down, and they're like obsessed about it, and like that would contribute to the weightiness, like this kind of focus, like extreme delusional focus. And they'll talk about weightiness also in terms of like the satisfaction you feel afterwards. Like, did that bring you like great joy to do that? So like a serial killer is like someone who like has like a kind of diluted satisfaction or pleasure, if you will, and that would be considered like a kind of heaviness to it. And there's other things too. So So the reason I bring that up is because of the self-defense. In a sense, the self-defense would make it less weighty, right? So if someone were genuinely attacking me and I killed them in the process of self-defense, because my action is motivated from a particular kind of motivation, it's relatively less weighty than other kinds of killing that could exist. And I think what's helpful about studying karma in a way is because karma is the teachings on karma are the Buddhists is a Buddhist attempt at moral philosophy or ethical structures. And so they're trying to, they're using Buddhist scriptures and Buddha says, don't kill or whatever, but they're trying to figure out all of what that constitutes. And so then different commentators kind of expand on and sort of elucidate the kinds of behavior that students engage in that could be ethically problematic. Um, what was your other point? Passing the buck one. Um, what was the other one? The third
Yeah,
point?
well, those the two, the self-defense and kind of passing
Yeah,
it to be somebody else's problem. You've addressed both of those, but then my
yeah.
third separate one was that culturally it kind of, it supports the status quo
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah,
accept
right.
your kind of,
Yeah,
your
yeah,
suffering in
yeah.
life.
Of course, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's probably that is definitely a criticism of any. mm, there's a tension between freedom and discipline that we all kind of naturally have, and and in one sense, there's people that make like, yeah, political commentaries um on religion, and their conclusion is that it sort of mollifies the masses or scares the masses into doing what you want, or that kind of thing. And it's interesting from a broad perspective. I can understand that argument, right? That if you have a whole bunch of people and you tell them that it's against God's will to uprise against the king, then the king can maintain power for that many more centuries. For and the divine rights of kings kind of can function like that, right? You can't question authority because they've said that it's against that you'll suffer in the long term and stuff. So I kind of, yeah, I mean, I understand that criticism. It's interesting though, because I kind of think from an individual perspective, your own moral life, whether it actually feels that way or not for an individual. So if someone tells me, hmm, well, maybe it's more helpful to have a different kind of an example. So do you have an example, Barbara, of something from Buddhism that feels like it would maintain the status quo, which would lead to oppression or something? Did you have an idea of?
Um, I no, but I think that mm, no, I don't have an example, but I
Okay.
think that it that believing that you were born into uh, a place, and for you to keep that place is it creates a social structure. And like, for
Mm,
example, in India with the caste system that you were
yeah.
talking about, where the
Right.
whole concept of karma originated. So it's like, if you were
Mm,
born into a particular caste, then, oh well, sucks to be you. And you just have to endure that and do the best you can with it. And maybe I'm being very flippant here, and I apologize.
no,
But
no,
kind
no.
of
I
like,
think
maybe
I
next time
yeah,
around you'll have better luck, or
yeah,
if you did well enough, you'll have a better you'll have a
yeah,
better life.
yeah,
So it's kind
yeah,
of like putting it all. Um, you suffer now and you're rewarded later, and
yeah.
it's. I mean, I guess karma ripens in a positive way too, so you can have
Mm-hmm.
good things happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess coming, like I'm more familiar probably throughout my life with Christianity and that whole kind of
Uh,
idea of like, well,
yeah,
there's a heaven waiting for you, but you really got to invest now. You have to
yeah,
suffer now and you'll be rewarded
uh,
later.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I see that kind of similarity in like
uh,
most of the religions that there's some kind of reward waiting for you.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, no, yeah. I mean, I think the Buddhist conception of karma is that, one, they kind of assert it's a natural law. It's just like the natural consequence of things. One, because Buddha is not like a creator deity, then karma is just a law that was observed or discovered through his meditative experience, but it's not actually like a punishment or reward that he's dispensing. And and then also they're pretty clear about the complexity of karma. So they talk about these generalities, these general principles, like avoiding the 10 non-virtues. This is like killing, stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, lying, harsh speech. They're not just that dissimilar from 10 Commandments, the actual points of them anyway. I lost my train of thought. They give these kind of sweeping kind of ideas that are sourced to sutras, where it's like Buddhist says, like, don't do this and don't do this, and that's not a good idea, and don't do this. But then they also say, that karma is so complex that we can't really understand it unless we were at the level of a Buddha. And so they talk about, all the causes and conditions that, create the colors on the feathers of a peacock. They believe that it must come from causes, but the specific complexity of all the infinite causes and conditions that would create a specific coloring on a specific feather on a specific peacock is too immense to know, in a way. So there's an aspect of karma where things arise from causes, not without causes. And we can see that in the external world, in the physical world, we can see cause and effect relationships very easily. And then they just take that one step down and they go, well, what if that occurs internally as well? That there's cause and effect internally as well. We believe in reincarnation we have different arguments for reincarnation. And so then when we think about, okay, the causes and conditions that create a kind of existence, where's the source of those? Like, is the person the source of those actions, or are they dispensed from a different entity, like a god or something like that? So there's all these kind of philosophical arguments that create like kind of a particular kind of worldview. What else about karma? Oh, I had something in my mind. I mean, you can talk about there being causes and effects, but the conclusion isn't that people should like just accept their lot in life. It's just that, for example, okay, let me think of an example. So Buddhists would argue that certain causes and conditions contribute to me being a certain height, for example. And also certain causes and conditions cause me to be in a certain kind of house. And if that house is not designed for tall people, which I am, then I might experience a kind of suffering because everything's so low, which it is. That's why I thought of it. So, but does that mean that I shouldn't change the environment in order to accommodate my height? I don't think there'd be any problem to that. So I think you could assert that there might be causes and conditions that create a kind of suffering, but I don't have to accept the suffering. And in fact, Buddhism is really all about transcending suffering in its grossest forms which is me suffering because my sinks are so low and I get lower back strain or whatever, all the way to the most subtle forms of suffering, which is uh, uncontrolled cyclic existence. So I think you could still make a case for social justice or equality, and I think the Buddhist conception of karma would still support that. But has Buddhism or Dharma been used unfairly against people? I guarantee you it has. And so I think that's where we as philosophers or budding spiritual practitioners or believers, if you will, we have to be, we get the we have the karma, if you will. We are luckily in an era where we have the ability to be much more conscientious consumers of religion and philosophy that other people before us didn't have the luxury of having. And so perhaps you could still have a system where you say, well, it's my good karma to be born in a postmodern age because I could be more critical about power structures and, trying to avoid abuses of different kinds. I don't know. I'm sort of free thinking. I mean, Shayla?
Oh, and doing your own research. You don't have to listen to just, one teacher and say, and, take everything that is said, at face value versus, learning from lots of teachers and lots of resources. So that is beneficial.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that. That's, this holiness is so open in a way. There's a sutra, or there's a passage of a sutra that's quoted by a scholar named Shantarakshita, and it talks about not accepting the Buddha's statements based on just his authority, but taking the time and feeling the freedom to think about those claims, to examine them in various forms. The workings of karma fall under the branch of phenomenon that are called extremely hidden, which is basically you can only, so let me back up. Okay, so when we're trying to decide how we know things in Tibetan Buddhism, they categorize three categories of objects of knowledge. One category is evident phenomenon. The second category is slightly obscured, maybe phenomenon. That might not be an exact translation. And the third category is extremely obscured phenomenon. And evident phenomenon is you being able to see me. So you can see with your own senses directly. So if I ask you what color is my shirt, I mean, it's kind of in between blue, who knows what we debate on, but you could I'm wearing a shirt, so that's evident. That's evident. And then subtle phenomenon are things that are known by way of correct inference. So if I say the flower is changing moment by moment, subtle impermanence. So you can see a flower, you can see a fresh cut living flower and a rotting dead flower, and that's gross impermanence. You can see that's evident, right? It's gross impermanent is evident to you. But if I said, but you know what, it must be changing from moment to moment to have that occur. It can't be that it just is one state and then it's another state. It must be decaying constantly, moment to moment. Well, you can't see that exactly. Although I was thinking you could use like video and kind of film it, but you can't, not with just your eyes. It's not evident, right? You can't see. You have to just infer it through thought. And then the third category is karma, extremely obscured or phenomenon, and His Holiness admits that that's taken on the basis of believing an authoritative figure in this case, because the Buddha said so in a way, and yet at the same time he's also saying, don't just believe something because the Buddha said so. So then how does he reconcile this thing? How does he reconcile those 2 points? So one way he does that is that there's a series of arguments and texts that try and establish that the Buddha is an authoritative figure. And I don't know them all off the top of my head, but one of the ideas from that collection of arguments is the Buddha is an authoritative figure because he teaches how reality exists, which is a subtly obscured phenomenon that you could understand by inference. So he teaches how things exist. So if he teaches how things exist, and you can learn to infer them correctly, then the idea is that lends credence to those things which he also talked about that are completely obscured or total or very obscured phenomenon like karma. Another idea that's helpful about those 3 levels of objects of knowledge is that we actually operate from authoritative sources of knowledge in our daily life all the time. So when I have I don't have very much natural science background, but when someone tells me the Earth is round, when I was a kid, I believed it on the basis of their authority, that it was an adult I trusted. They were in a school, which is an institution I trust, but I didn't actually know that for myself. It's not evident that it's round, as a kid, right? Because I don't go into a spaceship and see that it's round. And as an adult, someone could explain to me how you'd infer it, which I think you can infer the roundness of the Earth based off of shadows, and the different length of shadows at the same time of day, or like the difference between the length of shadows, like show that there's a curvature, something along that. So you can infer it, right? And then if I went into a spaceship, then it would be evident and I could see it. So I can move between understanding of an object, understanding a phenomenon in different kinds of ways, evidently through inference or just by authority. And so in the Buddhist worldview, karma starts off as just an authoritative principle. But it's argued that if you do the meditations, develop Shinei, develop meditative concentration, basically, then you'll be able to understand karma through, evidently, that you'll be able actually to see it. So the Buddha, as a non-enlightened person, according to the mythology, is in his palace having a good time. He sees the sufferings of old age, sickness, and death. He wants to transcend them. He goes out into the world. He learns meditation through his teachers, and then he sits and meditates, and over time he starts to witness the continuity of his lives. He starts to witness the moral the ethical consequences of his actions, and he goes through that process over however many years. So that's why it's not necessarily going to be convincing to a student, but it is helpful that it's on people's minds, and you're not the only one who's like, I'm not just going to accept this necessarily, or and so I think in the Buddhist tradition, there's lots of space to just appreciate the idea, see its consequences, and consider, the possibility without, you don't have to fully accept it or fully reject it. Just, I don't know. Was that interesting, helpful to anyone at all? I kind of just spun out there a little bit.
No, that was really good. And I think for me, maybe I need to not go to the macro level of society, and I need to look at, like when you mentioned
Mm.
the cabinetry in your home,
Oh
I
yeah,
kind of the flip side of that because I'm short. And so,
yeah.
and so it's like I went to reach for a can that my husband put up above, and it fell and hit me on the head. So I can accept that. It's like, okay, well, that's a little bit of a karmic action there, maybe. So so maybe I need to look at it, begin
Yeah.
at the micro level and look at it, what it means,
Mm-hmm.
in my life, rather
Mm-hmm.
than going right away to the
Yeah.
societal level.
Yeah.
But your explanations were really good, and it looks like I have a lot more reading to do. So,
Mm,
but
mm.
thank you
Yeah,
very much for
you're
that.
so welcome. You're so welcome. Thanks for, I've sometimes I feel so unfocused, and I just kind of blurt out. But I think it's also helpful to think of the relative nature of suffering and happiness a little bit. Like, for you, having the cabinets low is happiness. For me, it's a kind of suffering. So is low shelving good or bad? Well, for my karma, if you will, for my psychophysical constellation, it is a kind of suffering. And for you, it's a kind of happiness in a way, right? And so they might say that, you know my I don't have my environment karma is not perfect, or it's just helpful to look at the relative nature of things. um I was thinking of, mhm. It's the studying karma, studying like the relative weightiness of actions, studying the like enumeration of actions. They also talk about the difference between a complete karma and a sort of an incomplete karma. So let's take killing, because that's the first one. So a complete karma is something which it's called a complete karmic path, and it will, if it's generated by its nature, it could perpetuate a future life characterized by environmental suffering, characterized by the habit to kill again, characterized by um experiences similar to the cause, like maybe I get sick and I can't get healed a lot. um so to have that complete karma, you need to have all the pieces in place. So I need to have a basis of killing. I have something to kill, and I have to correctly identify it, and then I have to have a motivation, a delusion that inspires the motivation. So maybe I'm full of hate, and then I have the motivation, the desire to kill, and then I can complete the action and the person dies. So so they so you sort of so you kind of have that four components, and If all those components are complete, then that's considered, complete karma. That consequences might include a lower rebirth, a bad environment when I'm a human, the propensity to kill again, and experience of sickness, for example. So why is that important? Because they're starting to show, they're starting to look at how to examine a behavior and how to learn for ourselves how to judge whether to engage in a behavior or not, and how to analyze its relative goodness or badness. It's it's like moral philosophies or ethical philosophy. How do we determine what's good or bad, and how do we make categories between what's really good versus really bad? And so these are some of their answers. And I think it's helpful because killing a person with full of hatred and then feeling really good about it when they die has a weightiness, an ethical weightiness, from if I feel something on my forehead and then I brush it away and then it's a fruit fly, and it's so it helps us start to just notice our behavior and actions more. And the reason we need to and there's a couple of reasons why we need to notice our actions more. From the lower scope point of view, we need to notice our actions because we don't want to get propelled into these lower states of existence, which they believe is possible from an unaddressed, karma. In our lives today as humans, so there's that possibility, right? Another possibility is today in our lives as humans, if we want to develop concentration and to meditate, we need a life as uncomplex as possible. And one way to have that kind of life is to not engage in actions that create disturbance internally and disturbance externally. So when if we were to kill a person, the internal state is completely disturbed, and the consequence externally, could be, people hate you, and there's court proceedings, and people could have revenge on you, and you can see how it could get really big, right? And so that's another perspective by which to look at ethical action, is that it preserves the ability to engage in spiritual practice, to engage in meditation. So that's a pragmatic function. And then maybe a more metaphysical one is, well, I don't want to be a goat, so I'm not gonna, or I don't, want to. So you can kind of have different kind of things playing off each other, and some are going to be more convincing to others. Some are going to be more convincing than others, depending on the person. So was that helpful? I don't know. That was also another spontaneous kind of.
Yeah, for me it is. It really is. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for me, your explanation, because I can remember 2014, I was at a retreat with Venerable Robina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And she had emphasized in her inimitable way that with Buddhism, look at it yourself, examine it yourself, right? The Buddha proposes and you have to own it. And so when I asked her at another point, I didn't ask, I just sort of said, I really, really don't get necessarily the Buddha nature in all beings. It just doesn't grab me. And her response at that point, which I still go back to and query, was, well, Buddha said so. All right.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure she was inundated with, a lot of stuff, and that was just an answer. But it is something that then does seem to come up. It's like we have these complex explanation of other realms and beings and all of that. And then, who said that? Well, okay, so it came out of meditation. I can kind of get that. So, but it is interesting to me. So I'm glad that there is some discussion going on about how do we discriminate what we should look to someone else who obviously is more advanced and knowledgeable than ourselves, or where do we look, within ourselves? And for me, I keep going back to the self, asking myself, and investigating what is true for me. Yeah. And I know there's limitations, and I've got to tell you, I've quite frankly thought, if this means I have extra lifetimes because that's my pathway, well, I'll cop it sweet, as they say in Australia.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that that's so helpful. And I think it's very like you can really consulting with yourself and assessing for yourself what you believe and don't believe and what you have questions on. I think that's really helpful. I think it's what makes, at least the way I've experienced Buddhism, I think we're very lucky to be in a tradition that tries to not be too dogmatic. Although you're going to meet people that are dogmatic in Buddhism, and you're going to meet teachers that sound dogmatic, but there is space to not be. You can genuinely set things aside, question things, doubt things to a certain degree, and we could all still be a happy family. That's how I interpret it. And I think that for me has been I feel very lucky that we're in a period where we can do that. And it's very clear that that's the recommendation.
And this is the only tradition that is so available, which is so wonderful from my point of view. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
You can't really look at other variations of Buddhism. They're not this available. And certainly Vedanta, not so much. So
available in what sense?
Sorry?
Available in what sense?
Oh, I can be on Zoom classes probably 7 days. I really want to. Right?
Yes.
And there are classes taught here in Adelaide. There are a couple of Tibetan Buddhist centers, and I can go to those as well.
Yeah.
And so the richness of the learning and the teaching is great.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not so available here in Utah.
Oh no, you're in a different land.
Yes, I am.
In a different land. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm definitely appreciative of Zoom. So.
Oh, that's great. Yes. Yeah, we're this is a tradition. We have the technology. It's expanded our access to even the Dalai Lama. If you want to see a teaching of his, you can just get online now. And there's tons of commentaries. Things are translated now. And there's so much to learn, really. This is just a very, I'm just glossing over things. So yeah, anyway. Okay, so I'll end here and we'll just do a dedication. So all this energy, all this effort that we've put in, according to Buddhist worldview, it can be lost if it's not dedicated correctly. And so, but if we dedicate it correctly, then we can always draw from it, for until we've achieved all the goals we have. And so we can dedicate to the long lives of our spiritual teachers, those that shift our minds or inspire us or who we connect with. Those people that really help us change. And we can dedicate if we feel connected to the Buddhist tradition. So maybe never separated from the Buddhist tradition. Path of Renunciation, Bodhicitta, Pure View and Emptiness, 2 stages of Tantra practice. And then may all the environmental problems of this earth instantly cease, so those can practice spiritual paths can remain doing so. May all types of suffering and pain, animals and wars and different forms of oppression, all those, may those instantly cease. And may all those who are sick and dying, may they become well. If they can't become well, then may they transition and have a good death and become Buddhas as quick as possible for the benefit of others. And then may all the mundane needs of beings be met. And if we can help beings with their mundane needs, then may we not hesitate. And then their super mundane or their spiritual goals, may all the spiritual goals of beings come into fruition. And if we're able to help, then may we help without hesitation. And may all the institutions that support spiritual development, they have every resource they need. And may we become like holy objects in the world. So may, just by people interacting with us in any sort of way, good, bad, or in between, may we be, may it benefit them. And then at the very least, no matter what happens in our lives, whether we become Buddhist or not, or remain Buddhist or not, or whatever, at the very least, may we have kind and warm and gentle hearts, and always work to alleviate suffering when possible, and to work to contribute to the well-being and happiness of others, if possible. Okay, nice seeing you all. Thank you so much. And I'll be back next week, is my plan. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
And if you have
Thank you so much.
questions, yeah, you're so welcome. If you think of other questions, then we'll be able to talk about it all together and stuff. Okay.
Looking
Fabulous.
forward
Wonderful.
to it. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.